The knock shattered my morning peace, sharp and demanding, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. I wasn't ready for visitors, not after the exhausting week I'd survived, not after everything Derek had put me through. Setting down my coffee mug, I wiped my hands across my robe and moved toward the door, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Nothing could have prepared me for what waited on the other side. There she stood, Megan, Derek's new girlfriend, the woman he'd chosen over 12 years of marriage, the one he'd paraded around town while I picked up the fragments of my shattered life. She was smiling, that smug, victorious smile that made my stomach turn. Before I could even process her presence, she spoke, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You should start packing, Claire," she announced, tilting her head like she'd already won. "We're moving in." She held up folded papers, waving them like a trophy. "Derek didn't mention this to you?" Her grin widened. "This house belongs to him now, so if I were you, I'd start boxing up your things because we're taking over." A cold sensation crept through my chest, but instead of panic, I felt something sharper, something calmer. I let my lips curve into a smile because I knew something she didn't. Behind her, just beyond her line of sight, stood Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, and the real game was about to begin. It had started months ago, or perhaps if I'm being completely honest with myself, it had been building for years. Derek and I had been married for 12 years, and for most of that time, I had been the one holding everything together. The one who managed the finances, the one who made sure the mortgage was paid on time, the one who put in the effort when Derek started pulling away. I had ignored the warning signs at first because that's what you do when you love someone, when you believe in the vows you took. The late nights at the office became more frequent. His phone never left his hand anymore, and I'd catch him whispering into it in other rooms, his voice low and secretive. I told myself it was work stress, that he was dealing with something difficult, that our marriage was just going through a rough patch like every marriage does. But then I saw them together, and everything changed in an instant. It was supposed to be a relaxing evening, a girls' night out that my friend had organized to help me escape the tension suffocating our home. I had been looking forward to it, desperate for a break from the stress of trying to hold on to a marriage that was slipping through my fingers. We walked into the restaurant, laughing about something trivial, and then I saw him. Derek was sitting in a corner booth, his hand resting on hers, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years, his eyes bright with something I no longer recognized. She was younger, prettier in that effortless way some women are, and the way he looked at her told me everything I needed to know. My friend grabbed my arm, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't speak because something inside me had just snapped, not with rage, but with cold, calculated clarity. I didn't confront him that night because I knew better. I knew that anger would only give him the upper hand, that tears would make him feel justified in his betrayal. Instead, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and started planning because if Derek thought he could humiliate me, if he thought he could take what was mine and walk away unscathed, he had severely underestimated me. The house had always been mine, long before Derek ever entered my life. My grandmother had left it to me in her will, a beautiful 2-story home with hardwood floors and a garden I had spent years cultivating. When Derek and I got married, he had asked multiple times to add his name to the deed, always with some reasonable excuse about making things easier, about us being a team. But something in my gut had told me to keep it separate, to protect this one thing that was truly mine. He had laughed it off at first, making jokes about me not trusting him, but over time his requests became more insistent, more frustrated. "Why does it matter?" he would say, his tone edged with irritation. "We're married. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." Except in Derek's world, that philosophy only worked one way. What was mine was his, and what was his remained untouchable. I had watched him over the years, the way he'd casually drain our joint account for his hobbies, his lunches, his secret purchases, but hesitate when it came to contributing anything of his own. I had ignored it then, convincing myself that marriage was about compromise, about trust, about giving someone the benefit of the doubt. I had trusted him completely, and he had counted on me being too heartbroken, too emotionally destroyed by his affair to fight back when the time came. But what Derek didn't know, what neither of them could have possibly known, was that I had been fighting back since the moment I saw him with her. I had quietly gathered every financial document, every receipt, every piece of evidence that showed exactly what Derek had been doing with our money. I had met with Mr. Thompson multiple times, reviewing every legal option, making sure that when the time came, I would be protected. Derek had filed for divorce, assuming he'd walk away with half of everything, assuming the house would be split between us, assuming I'd be too broken to challenge him. He had even tried to file fraudulent paperwork claiming ownership of the property, thinking I'd never notice, thinking I'd be too devastated to care. He had moved Megan into a temporary apartment, promising her they'd soon be living in a beautiful house, my house, starting their new life together while I was left with nothing. I knew all of this because Derek had never been good at covering his tracks. He'd always been arrogant, always assumed he was the smartest person in the room. And that arrogance, that absolute certainty that he had won, was exactly what I had been counting on. So when Megan showed up at my door that morning with her fake deed and her smug smile, ready to claim her prize, I knew exactly what was coming next. And I was ready. Megan's confident smile began to falter as Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his presence finally registering in her mind. The arrogance she had walked in with, that absolute certainty that she had already won, started to crack around the edges. What is this?" she stammered, her voice not quite as steady as it had been moments ago. I took my time responding, letting the silence stretch between us, watching as doubt began to creep into her expression. "You seem incredibly sure of yourself, Megan," I said slowly, tilting my head as I studied her reaction. "Like you think you already own this house, like you and Derek have somehow outsmarted me." Her fingers tightened around the papers she was holding, her posture shifting defensively as she tried to hold on to her conviction. "Derek transferred ownership to himself," she snapped, holding up the document as if it were irrefutable proof. "He told me you didn't have any choice in the matter. This house is his now. We checked everything." I smiled again, letting the question hang in the air. "Did you?" I glanced at Mr. Thompson, who had remained silent this entire time, calmly organizing the folder in his hands. He adjusted his glasses, his expression completely neutral, professional, and unreadable. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, addressing me formally while completely ignoring Megan's presence. "Would you prefer to explain the situation, or shall I handle it?" I turned back to Megan, taking in every detail of her reaction, the way her confidence was finally beginning to waver under the weight of uncertainty. "Go ahead," I told him, keeping my voice calm and measured. I think she deserves to hear this from a professional. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and directed his attention to Megan, who was now gripping those papers like they were the only thing keeping her afloat. "You see, Miss Megan," he began, his tone patient but with an edge of amusement. "The house was never Derek's property to transfer." Silence filled the room as his words sank in. Megan blinked rapidly, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. "What?" she finally managed to whisper. My lawyer continued, his voice steady and deliberate. "This house," he gestured around the room we were standing in, "was never registered in Derek's name. Not before the marriage, not during the marriage, and certainly not during any divorce proceedings." Megan's face went pale, but she recovered quickly, shaking her head in denial as if refusing to accept what she was hearing. "That's impossible," she scoffed. "Derek told me everything was handled. He said the lawyers worked it all out. He said this house was his." "Derek lied," I cut in, my voice sharp and clear. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with confusion and the first hints of real panic. I walked over to the side table near the entrance and picked up a different set of documents. The real ones, the ones that actually mattered. I held them up between my fingers, letting her see the official seals, the legal stamps, the notarized signatures. "This house was mine before I ever met Derek," I explained, my tone even and controlled. "It was left to me in my grandmother's will when I was 23 years old. I never added Derek's name to the deed, no matter how many times he asked, no matter how much he pressured me. He had absolutely no legal claim to this property during our marriage, and he certainly doesn't have any claim to it now." Megan's lips parted, but she still couldn't form words, couldn't process what she was hearing. I took a step closer, watching as the reality of the situation finally began to break through her denial. "Whatever paperwork Derek gave you, Whatever promises he made about your future together, it's completely worthless. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, and then I saw it happen. The exact moment when the truth hit her. I watched her face transform from confusion to understanding, then to doubt, and finally to pure panic. Derek had always underestimated me, had always assumed I'd be too emotional, too heartbroken, too weak to stand up for myself. I remembered how he used to dismiss my concerns, how he'd laugh when I insisted on keeping certain assets separate. "Why does it even matter?" he'd say with that condescending tone. "We're supposed to be partners, Claire. Why don't you trust me?" But I had seen the truth long before he left, had seen the way he carefully protected what was his while assuming everything I owned was fair game. I had trusted him with my heart, with 12 years of my life, but I had never trusted him with my future, and that decision had just saved me from complete destruction. Megan took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself, trying to salvage some dignity from this nightmare. "Derek said the house was his," she repeated, but this time it sounded more like she was trying to convince herself than me. "He said he had it all worked out with the lawyers. He promised we could move in and start fresh." Mr. Thompson sighed, closing his folder with a soft snap. "He worked nothing out," he stated bluntly. "What Derek actually did was attempt to file fraudulent ownership documents, which is exactly what you're currently holding." Megan's grip on those papers loosened, her hands beginning to tremble. I crossed my arms and waited, letting the silence do the rest of the work for me, watching as she processed the magnitude of Derek's deception. And then, right on cue, she snapped. "That lying bastard," she muttered under her breath, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and humiliation. I raised an eyebrow, unable to suppress a small smile. "Is something wrong, Megan?" She turned toward me so quickly I almost laughed at the fury blazing in her eyes. "He told me this was his house," she said, her voice rising with each word. "He said he was kicking you out. He said we could move in together and build our life here. He promised me everything." I tilted my head slightly, studying her with detached curiosity. "And you believed him?" Her eyes flashed dangerously, but she didn't respond because she knew I was right. I could see the wheels turning in her head now, the slow, painful realization creeping in. If Derek had lied about something this massive, what else had he lied about? What other promises were built on nothing but deception? Megan's hands were shaking violently as she grabbed her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping frantically against the screen as she scrolled through her contacts. I stood back and watched with detached amusement as she found Derek's name, her breathing coming in short, angry bursts. She was unraveling right in front of me, the confidence she'd walked in with completely shattered. Just minutes ago, she had stood in my doorway like a conqueror, certain she was about to claim her prize, and now she was scrambling to understand how badly she'd been deceived. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms, fully prepared to enjoy what came next. She hit dial, and the phone rang twice before Derek's voice came through the speaker, confident and casual, completely oblivious to the storm about to hit him. "Hey babe, what's up?" he said, his tone so relaxed it was almost comical. Megan didn't waste a single second. "You lying piece of garbage," she screamed into the phone, her voice rising with every syllable. "You told me the house was yours, that we were moving in, that you had thrown Claire out." There was a long pause, and I could practically hear Derek's brain trying to catch up with what was happening. What are you talking about?" he finally managed, his voice tinged with confusion. Megan spun toward me, her eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. "Tell him," she demanded. I smirked and picked up my coffee mug, taking a slow, deliberate sip before setting it back down. "Hey, Derek," I said smoothly, my voice dripping with satisfaction. "Interesting morning we're having, wouldn't you say?" Another pause, longer this time, and when his voice returned, it had lost all its confidence. "What's going on?" he asked, and I could hear the first hints of panic creeping in. Megan's grip on her phone tightened until her knuckles turned white. "I'll tell you exactly what's going on," she hissed. "I just showed up at Claire's house, ready to move in like you promised, and guess what, Derek?" She turned back toward me, her expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. Claire still owns the house. She owns everything, and you lied to me about all of it. I could almost hear Derek's stomach drop through the phone. That's not possible, he stammered, his words tumbling over each other. I filed all the paperwork. I took care of everything. Megan cut him off before he could continue. You filed? Nothing, she shouted. You lied to me. You told me we were starting fresh. You said you had taken care of everything in the divorce. Derek's breathing grew heavier, more labored, and I knew he was finally realizing that his carefully constructed plan had just collapsed around him. You don't understand, he said quickly, desperation bleeding into his voice. I was going to fix it. I had a plan. Megan let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Fix it? You told me we had nothing to worry about. You told me you got everything in the settlement. I raised an eyebrow at that statement, unable to resist interjecting. Everything? I said, my voice calm but cutting. Oh, Derek, you really are delusional. Let me clarify something for Megan here. You didn't get the house, you didn't get any stake in my business, and you certainly didn't get access to the joint account you tried to drain. The only thing you walked away with was your car. Megan turned back to the phone, and I watched as the reality continued to sink in. And that car? She said slowly, her voice shaking. Is what, a 10-year-old sedan that barely runs? Derek was silent, completely silent, and that silence said everything. Megan closed her eyes and let out another bitter laugh, this one edged with something darker, something that sounded like genuine despair. Oh my God, she whispered. You really have nothing. We have nothing. I watched her carefully as she paced across my living room floor, still gripping that phone like it was the only solid thing left in her world. I left everything for you, Derek, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. I believed in you. I trusted every word you said. Derek was still scrambling on the other end, still trying desperately to regain control of the situation. Baby, listen to me, he started, but she cut him off immediately. Don't you dare call me baby, she snapped. You told me we'd be living in a beautiful house. You told me we'd be set for life, and now you're telling me you have absolutely nothing? That we have nothing? She was unraveling completely now, and I wasn't about to stop her because this was exactly what Derek deserved. His voice grew more desperate, more frantic. Megan, come on. We're in this together. We can figure it out. Megan let out another sharp, humorless laugh. No, Derek, she said coldly. You dragged me into this disaster. I didn't sign up to be broke and homeless with you. She suddenly turned toward me, her eyes wild and accusatory. You planned this, she said, pointing at me with her free hand. You wanted me to find out like this? You wanted to humiliate me. I shrugged, completely unbothered by her accusation. I didn't force you to show up at my house uninvited, Megan, I replied evenly. That was entirely your choice, yours and Derek's. Her lips parted, then snapped shut because she knew I was right. She had no argument against the truth. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in completely now. Derek had used her, manipulated her, played her, just like he'd tried to play me, and now she was paying the price for believing his lies. Megan turned back to the phone, her entire body trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. I should have known, she said through gritted teeth. You didn't love me? You just needed someone stupid enough to go along with your pathetic fantasy. Derek's voice was pure panic now. Megan, please, we can talk about this. Click. She hung up without another word, cutting him off mid-sentence. Then she turned to face me, and for a long moment we just stood there in silence. Two women who had both been fooled by the same man. Her face was a complicated mixture of emotions, humiliation, rage, regret, and something else I recognized all too well, the crushing weight of realizing you'd thrown away everything for someone who never deserved it in the first place. And then, to my complete surprise, she laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor whatsoever. I can't believe I fell for him, she said quietly, shaking her head. I didn't respond because there was nothing I could say that would make this moment any easier for her. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair, and then without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. I watched her leave, wondering briefly what would become of her now. Whether she'd run back to Derek and try to salvage whatever scraps remained, or whether she'd finally do the smart thing and cut her losses completely. Either way, it didn't matter to me anymore because the one thing I knew with absolute certainty was this: Derek had lost everything. And for the first time in a very long time, I had won. Megan's footsteps echoed down my driveway as she stormed away, phone still clutched in her shaking hand, her entire world having collapsed in the span of 20 minutes. She had arrived here thinking she was stepping into her new life, and instead she had walked straight into the most humiliating reality check of her existence. I didn't call after her, didn't feel even a shred of sympathy because she had made her choices and now she had to live with the consequences. I turned back to Mr. Thompson, who was still standing in my living room, calmly organizing his notes as if we hadn't just witnessed a complete emotional breakdown. "Well," he said finally, looking up at me with the hint of a smile. That was certainly entertaining. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head slowly. "She really thought she'd won," I murmured. She genuinely believed she had everything figured out. My lawyer closed his folder with a satisfying snap. "That's what happens when people put their faith in the wrong person," he replied. And with that simple statement, I closed the door, literally and figuratively, locking out the past for good. I had barely finished my now cold coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. Derek. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether answering was even worth my time. Part of me wanted to ignore him, completely, but another part of me wanted to hear the desperation in his voice one final time. Curiosity won. I picked up the phone, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "What do you want, Derek?" His breathing was uneven on the other end, ragged with frustration and barely contained panic. "Claire, whatever you told Megan, you need to fix it right now," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "She just called me screaming, saying I ruined her entire life." I smirked, swirling the remnants of my coffee slowly. "Derek, you did that completely on your own," I replied calmly. "I didn't make you lie to her." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then his tone shifted, became almost pleading. "Listen," he said. "Let's just talk about this like adults. We were married for 12 years, Claire. You can't just throw me away like I'm nothing." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity. "Oh, but you could throw me away?" I asked, my voice turning cold. "You could walk out, drain our accounts, move on with your younger girlfriend, and expect me to just accept it quietly?" "That's different," he snapped defensively. "I made mistakes, okay?" But I was hurt too. We weren't happy. I let his words hang in the air for a moment, then asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Are you happy now, Derek?" More silence. As much as I wanted to hang up and never hear his voice again, I had one final piece of information to deliver. "By the way, Derek," I said, keeping my tone light, "I received a call from Mr. Thompson this morning." I heard him swallow hard. "In your petition to revisit the divorce settlement?" I paused deliberately. The judge dismissed it again, permanently this time. His frustration exploded into outright rage. "This isn't fair, Claire," he shouted. "You set me up, you planned this entire thing behind my back." I couldn't help but smile. "No, Derek," I said calmly. "I just paid attention to the details." And with that final statement, I hung up. I expected that to be the last interaction I'd ever have with Derek. I was wrong. 2 days later, Megan was back at my doorstep, but this time everything about her was different. There was no smug grin, no condescending tone. She looked completely defeated. Her usually flawless makeup smudged, her perfectly styled blonde hair messy, like she hadn't had the energy to fix it. I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Megan," I said neutrally, "what do you want?" She hesitated, shifting her weight, looking down before finally meeting my eyes. And then she did something I never expected. She apologized. "I was stupid," she said, her voice cracking. "I believed everything he told me. He said you were cold and controlling, that you didn't support him." She shook her head, letting out a bitter laugh. "I thought I was different, that he wouldn't do to me what he did to you." I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "But you were right about everything," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "He used me, took all my money, maxed out my credit cards, and when I asked him to help with rent, he told me I was too much to handle, that I was holding him back. And just like that, Megan had become exactly what I had been a year ago. I exhaled slowly, studying her face, seeing my own pain reflected back. "So what now?" I asked carefully. "You planning to run back to him?" She laughed, shaking her head. "No, I'm done. Completely done." She hesitated. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I watched her for a long moment, unsure if I had truly forgiven her, but understanding exactly where she was standing. I nodded slowly. "Good luck, Megan," I said simply. She gave me a small, sad smile, and then she turned and walked away, finally ready to start rebuilding. That night, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine, reflecting on everything that had happened. I had thought revenge would feel different, that when Derek finally hit rock bottom, I'd feel some rush of victory. But the truth was simpler. I didn't feel anything for him anymore. I had won, not because I had destroyed him, but because I had moved on. Because I had built something entirely my own. Derek was still stuck in his same destructive patterns, and that wasn't my problem anymore. Mr. Thompson sent me one final update a week later. Derek had applied for a new credit card and been denied. He had tried to secure a personal loan and been rejected by every bank. He was drowning, and for once, I wasn't going to save him. I lifted my wine glass and whispered softly, "Good luck, Derek." And just like that, I closed the chapter on him forever. The following morning was crisp and quiet as I stepped into my boutique, the small shop Derek had once mocked. The bell chimed softly, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely at peace. I had won not through shouting or bitter revenge, but simply by living well. I hadn't heard from Derek in weeks, and I assumed he had finally given up. But then one morning I saw it, a message from an unknown number. "Claire, I messed up. I know you hate me, but I need help. I lost my job and I have nowhere to go. Can we please just talk?" I stared at those words, waiting for some emotion to surface, but I felt absolutely nothing. I deleted the message without responding, and that was it. No more Derek, just my future. A week later, Megan walked into my boutique looking nervous, hesitating near the entrance. I folded my arms and waited. She took a deep breath and walked toward the counter. "I got a job," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" She nodded. "Marketing, it's not much, but it's completely mine." For the first time, Megan didn't look arrogant. She looked real, humbled, changed. I gave her a slow, approving nod. "Good for you," I said. She let out a shaky laugh. "Honestly, I don't know how you put up with him for 12 years. I smirked. "I don't know either." She hesitated. "I know I don't deserve it, but do you think maybe we could be friends someday?" I thought about it carefully. "Not friends," I said. "Honestly, but maybe one day." That answer was enough. She nodded, bought a scarf, and walked out ready to start fresh. It was exactly 1 year later when I saw Derek again at a gas station, the most mundane setting for our final encounter. I had pulled in when I spotted him across the lot, standing beside a rusted sedan that looked like it was barely holding together. He looked so different. Thinner, exhausted, defeated. For just a brief moment, our eyes met, and in that single second, I knew exactly what he was thinking. She got everything, and I have nothing. But what Derek would never understand was that I hadn't won because I took things from him. I had won because I refused to let him take my future. I gave him a small nod, and then drove away without looking back, leaving him in my rearview mirror, growing smaller until he disappeared. That was the last time I ever saw Derek. Years passed, and my boutique expanded into 3 additional locations. I had built new friendships, discovered new passions, traveled to places I'd only dreamed about, and for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. I kept a framed quote in my office, right above my desk, a simple reminder of everything I had survived. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's moving on and building something better. And that's exactly what I did. I moved forward. I built a life I was proud of, and I never looked back. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below, And don't forget to subscribe for more compelling stories about strength, resilience, and moving forward.